On this most holy of days, many of us are rolling up and smoking some weed because most of us think weed should be legal for many reasons. But what about all the other drugs? I am here today to advocate the legalization of all drugs in America. That's right, every last one of them. For starters, the drug trade generates a ton of wealth that's not being taxed right now. In fact, we actually pay more taxes by having to pay for cops and jails and etc. to keep the drugs off the street. Kind of dumb. Secondly, we already have the most dangerous drugs legalized: alcohol, nicotine, heroin, and meth. So why not just legalize all of them? Finally, Portugal has already decriminalized all of its drugs, and they've seen a huge drop in drug problems and crimes in general. This is not a speech to convince you to start doing a bunch of drugs while you're bored in quarantine. It will hopefully convince you that this whole war on drugs is a pointless attempt at brainwashing old people into being scared of drugs so that they go out and vote for politicians that promise to be against these said drugs when the politicians are the ones that are doing these drugs. They're just saying this because all they care about is getting reelected. Let's dive into the tax problem here. Just how much money could we be making? It's hard to say for sure, but let's look at what Polyfact, which is an online news article, wrote in October 13th, 2019. About $53 million worth of drugs cross the U.S.-Mexico border a week. That's just the U.S.-Mexico border. We have drugs coming in from Canada: acid, weed, mushrooms, but the big money's the cocaine and all of that stuff, meth and all that jazz. So that's like a lot of money that's not being taxed at all. It's basically being like stolen so the government doesn't have to use it for roads, which if you've driven around here, our roads could definitely use about $53 million a week of tax money for sure. They're terrible. And education. If we could use the drugs to pay for our education, we would be smart enough to elect the right politicians in no time. That's my 2 cents. So let's look at the drugs that are actually legal: alcohol, nicotine. What's all this about? According to National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism's article, last updated February 2020, an estimated 88,000 people die from alcohol-related causes annually, making it the third leading preventable cause of death in America. The first is tobacco, which is the nicotine. That's not good. And it's like these old people that are getting mad about this war on drugs. They're the ones dying from the alcohol and the nicotine, but they're saying that's okay. But like mushrooms and weed and like acid and cocaine and all this stuff that like people aren't really dying from is bad. It doesn't make any sense if you think about it from a strictly logical standpoint. But let's get into what I was talking about, this meth and heroin. How is meth and heroin legal? Oh, ADHD pills. Most of them, like Adderall, Vyvanse, Ritalin, these are all amphetamine derivatives. That means they have a bunch of amphetamine in them. Amphetamine, oh, whoa, wonder where I've heard that before. Methamphetamine, it's meth. The government and Big Pharma are getting our kids, your kids, all these kids addicted to meth. There's been no long-term studies about how this affects people. There's been a couple on Ritalin, and what it says is those kids are addicted to meth basically now. So that's not good. And then let's look at the painkillers. The opioids, opium, heroin. It's heroin. you get hooked on the painkillers, you can't afford them anymore, you can't get your prescription, you're shooting up heroin. This is a huge problem in America. I don't need to cite any sources. I don't think, like, you should have heard about this on the news at least 100 times by now. This is not good. Let's think about this. This war on drugs is clearly just fake news to get people reelected, to scare you. Because we have, like, what's it solved? If there's still $53 million coming in a week, like, war's not working. War's lost. Let's give up. Vietnam, let's pack it up and leave. What the fuck? Speaking of different countries, let's look at Portugal. This is kind of a long quote. So, according to the Guardian's online news article posted December 5th, 2017, in 2001, nearly 2 decades into Piria's accidental specialization in addiction, some scientist person, Portugal became the first country to decriminalize the possession and consumption of all illicit substances. Rather than being arrested, those caught with a personal supply might be given a warning, small fine, or told to appear before a local commission, a doctor, a lawyer, a social worker, about treatment, harm reduction, and the support services that were available to them. The opioid crisis soon stabilized, and the ensuing years saw dramatic drops in problematic drug use, HIV and hepatitis infection rates, overdose deaths, drug-related crime, and incarceration rates. HIV infections plummeted from an all-time high in 2000 of 104.2 new cases per million to 4.2 cases per million in 2015. That's huge. This is working for them. This is good. What do we do in America? We institutionalize people. So we get them for smoking pot, having a little cocaine or some mushrooms or whatever on their person. They get institutionalized. They get put in jail, where it takes a pretty big mental toll on you, because once you go to jail, it's a lot easier to go back to jail. One, because you have the record, so the cop is more likely to take you in. And two, just because you've been there. It's familiar. You don't feel as, like, scared going back. It creates this really bad snowball effect that really fucks with people's heads. It's really, like, ruins lots of people's lives. And we have government mandated rehab type stuff here, but I've actually been to that, and I can say that it's really sketchy. Like, the whole time they want you to, like, smoke more and more cigarettes, and they treat you like some kind of, like, kid, and, like, that they're, like, superior to you because you got caught smoking pot, and it's very dehumanizing. It makes you want to do more drugs, honestly. The system is very flawed. So today, I've told you about how much tax money we could make off of legalizing drugs. The fact that the most dangerous drugs are already legal. And I told you what Portugal did about their drug problem. So, let your politicians know that their go-to voter market is about to get completely wiped out by this coronavirus. So they better legalize all the drugs if they want your vote. That's all they care about. Let's get high, boys and ladies.